The fastest way to lose a marriage is not betrayal. It is convincing yourself that the person who loves you will never stop waiting. My name is Michael Carter. I am 48 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed that being a good husband meant being available. Available when my wife needed support. Available when she needed patience. Available when she needed understanding. What I did not realize was that constant availability can slowly become invisibility. Looking back now, I can trace the exact moment everything changed. Not because it was dramatic. Not because anyone raised their voice. It changed because of a single sentence delivered with complete certainty. It happened on a Thursday evening in late October. I had just finished a long day at work. Rain tapped softly against the office windows while most of the building emptied out around me. Lauren had texted earlier saying she was meeting friends after work. That was not unusual. She had become increasingly independent over the past few years. More dinners out, more weekends away with friends, more parts of her life that seemed separate from mine. I told myself it was healthy. I told myself modern marriages needed space. Maybe they do, but there is a difference between space and distance. Around 8:30 that evening, I glanced at my phone. No message. No update. Nothing. Again, that was not unusual. Still, after 18 years of marriage, I thought a simple check-in was reasonable. Not because I wanted control, because I cared. So I called her. The phone rang 4 times before she answered. Loud music played in the background. People were laughing. Hey, I said. Just wanted to make sure you got there okay. There was a pause. Then a sigh. Not a tired sigh. An irritated one. Michael, seriously? She said. What? I asked. I am out with friends. I know. I was just checking on you. Another pause. Then came the sentence. The one I would replay in my head for months afterward. Do not call me. I am not your property. The words hit harder than they should have. Not because they were loud. Because they were cold. I sat there staring at the rain sliding down the glass outside my office window. For a second, I honestly wondered if she was joking. But her tone told me everything I needed to know. There was no humor. No affection. No misunderstanding. Just annoyance. As if my concern had become an inconvenience. Looking back, I should not have been surprised. Similar moments had been happening for years. Small dismissals. Small corrections. Small reminders that my presence mattered less than it once did. But something about hearing those words spoken so directly changed the way I saw everything. I took a slow breath. For the first time in a very long time, I did not defend myself. I did not explain my intentions. I did not argue. Instead, I simply nodded even though she could not see me. Then I said 6 words that surprised even me. Perfect. Then do not come home. Silence. Complete silence. The music in the background suddenly seemed very far away. Lauren did not speak immediately. Neither did I. For years I had been the one trying to keep peace. The one trying to explain. The one trying to make sure every disagreement ended smoothly. This time felt different. This time I felt calm. Not angry. Not emotional. Calm. What is that supposed to mean? She finally asked. Her voice sounded sharper now. More alert. Exactly what it sounds like, I replied. Another long pause followed. Then she laughed. Not because she found it funny. Because she assumed I was bluffing. You are being ridiculous, she said. Maybe she expected me to back down. Maybe she expected an apology. Maybe she expected the version of me she had grown used to. Instead, I simply said good night and ended the call. I sat alone in my office for several minutes afterward. The rain continued falling. The city lights reflected across the wet streets below. Normally, I would have felt guilty. Normally, I would have called back. Instead, I experienced something I had not felt in years. Clarity. Because for the first time, I stopped focusing on the sentence I had spoken. I started focusing on the sentence she had spoken. Not your property. I had never wanted ownership. I wanted partnership. I wanted respect. I wanted the kind of marriage where concern was not treated like control. Somewhere along the way, those things had disappeared. The drive home felt unusually quiet. When I walked into the house, everything looked exactly the same. The family photos. The framed vacation pictures. The furniture we spent years choosing together. Yet something felt different. It was as if the foundation beneath all those memories had shifted. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. 10 o'clock became 11. 11 became midnight. Lauren never came home. And as I sat there listening to the silence fill every room of the house, I realized something that frightened me far more than her absence. For the first time in 18 years, I was no longer afraid of losing this marriage. And that realization would change everything. The next morning felt strangely normal. Sunlight poured through the kitchen windows. The coffee maker hummed softly on the counter. Cars moved through the neighborhood as people left for work. From the outside, nothing had changed. But I knew better. Something had shifted the night before. Not inside the house. Inside me. Lauren still had not come home. Her side of the bed remained untouched. Her coffee mug sat where she left it the previous morning. Small reminders that a person could be physically absent long before they officially left your life. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stood by the window overlooking our backyard. The maple trees had already turned shades of gold and orange. Fallen leaves covered the grass like a blanket. 18 years. That number kept returning to me. 18 years of birthdays, holidays, mortgage payments, school events, weekend projects, vacations, shared responsibilities, shared dreams. Looking back, I realized something uncomfortable. The marriage had not started falling apart recently. It had been happening slowly for years. The previous night had simply forced me to stop pretending otherwise. Around 7:30, my phone vibrated. Lauren's name appeared on the screen. I stared at it for several seconds before answering. "Hello," I said calmly. There was a pause. Then her voice. "I stayed at Melissa's place." "Okay." Another pause. She seemed surprised by my response. Normally, I would have asked questions. "Where are you? Are you okay? When are you coming home?" This time I asked none of them. "That is all you have to say?" she asked. "You said you stayed at Melissa's place." Silence followed. I could almost hear her trying to figure out what had changed. Eventually, she ended the call with a short goodbye. Afterward, I set the phone down and continued getting ready for work. The conversation stayed with me throughout the day, not because of what was said, because of what was not said. For years, Lauren had become accustomed to my concern, my attention, my effort. Somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing those things as gifts and started seeing them as obligations. The more I thought about it, the clearer everything became. Lauren had not betrayed me with another person. The wound ran deeper than that. She had slowly stopped respecting me. Respect is a strange thing. Most people only notice its value after it disappears. Love can survive difficult seasons. Attraction can fade and return. But once respect begins eroding, everything else starts collapsing with it. Around lunchtime, I found myself looking through old photos on my phone. There was one from a family trip to Yellowstone nearly 10 years earlier. Lauren stood beside me smiling while our daughter laughed between us. We looked happy. Maybe we were. Or maybe we were simply standing at a point before life had started pulling us in different directions. I stared at the photo longer than I expected. The hardest part was not missing who Lauren used to be. It was missing who we used to be together. By the time I returned home that evening, Lauren's car was back in the driveway. I parked beside it and sat quietly for a moment. The old version of me would have felt nervous, anxious about the conversation waiting inside. The new version felt something else. Curiosity. When I walked through the front door, Lauren sat at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone. She looked up immediately. Her expression seemed uncertain, almost cautious. "Hey," she said. "Hey." Neither of us moved. Neither of us smiled. The silence stretched longer than usual. Finally, she set her phone down. "About last night." I waited. I think we both overreacted. There it was. The first attempt to minimize what happened. The first attempt to file everything away and return to normal. Months earlier, maybe years earlier, I probably would have accepted it. Not anymore. Did we? I asked calmly. Lauren frowned slightly. "What is that supposed to mean?" I looked around the kitchen. At the family photographs hanging on the wall. At the refrigerator covered in old memories and magnets collected during vacations. Then I looked back at her. "I do not think last night started anything," I said quietly. "I think it revealed something that has been there for a long time." For the first time, Lauren had no immediate response. She simply stared at me. And in that moment, I realized she was beginning to see the same truth I had finally accepted. The problem was not one argument. The problem was that we had been living separate emotional lives under the same roof for years. What neither of us understood yet was just how much that realization was about to cost us. The hardest truths are usually the ones that arrive long after everyone else can see them. For years, I believed Lauren and I were simply going through a rough season. Work stress, aging parents, financial responsibilities, an empty nest after our daughter left for college. Every explanation sounded reasonable. That was the problem. Reasonable explanations can hide uncomfortable realities for a very long time. After our conversation in the kitchen, life appeared to return to normal, at least on the surface. We woke up, went to work, ate dinner, shared the same house, shared the same routines. But something fundamental had changed. I was no longer trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Once you stop lying to yourself, certain patterns become impossible to ignore. Over the following weeks, I started noticing details I had spent years overlooking. Lauren rarely asked about my day. When she did, the question felt automatic. A formality. Most of the time her attention remained focused on her phone, her work, her friends, or whatever else occupied her world. I do not think she was intentionally cruel. In some ways, that made it worse. Cruelty requires awareness. Indifference does not. One evening, I came home after a long meeting that had stretched nearly 2 hours beyond schedule. A major client had threatened to pull funding from an important project. The entire management team spent the afternoon trying to solve the problem. By the time I walked through the front door, I was mentally exhausted. Lauren sat in the living room scrolling through social media. "Hey," I said. "Hey." That was it. No questions. No curiosity. Nothing. I went upstairs, changed clothes, and sat alone on the back patio watching the sunset fade behind the mountains. It struck me then that if something significant happened in my life, Lauren would probably be among the last people to hear about it. Not because I wanted to exclude her, because she had gradually stopped making space for those conversations. Looking back, I could see the progression clearly. Years earlier, she used to ask about everything. Small victories, bad days, new ideas. We talked for hours. Then conversations became shorter, then less frequent. Eventually, they became optional. Somewhere along the way, she stopped treating me like a partner and started treating me like a permanent fixture. Like the kitchen table, like the refrigerator, like something that would always be there regardless of how much attention it received. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself cleaning out the garage. The smell of old wood, motor oil, and cardboard filled the air. Shelves overflowed with tools, holiday decorations, and forgotten projects. As I sorted through boxes, I found a binder containing old financial records and family plans. Vacation budgets, college savings goals, retirement projections. Page after page documented years of effort. Years spent building a stable life for the people I loved. I sat down on a folding chair and flipped through the pages slowly. The strange thing was that I did not feel angry. I felt tired. Tired of carrying responsibilities that no longer seemed appreciated. Tired of trying harder every time the relationship drifted further apart. Tired of believing effort alone could save something that required two people. Later that evening, Lauren came into the garage and leaned against the doorway. "You have been spending a lot of time out here lately," she said. "I guess I have." She looked around. "What are you doing?" "Getting organized." She nodded slowly. Then she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Are you unhappy?" For a moment, I simply stared at her. Not because I did not know the answer, because I was surprised she had finally asked. The question arrived years late. "Do you really want to know?" I replied. Lauren hesitated. The pause lasted only a second, but it told me everything. She wanted reassurance. She wanted the comfortable answer. She did not want honesty. "Forget it," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked back inside. I remained there long after she left. The garage grew darker as evening settled across the neighborhood. Somewhere in the distance, a lawn sprinkler clicked rhythmically. A dog barked. A car drove past. Ordinary sounds from an ordinary suburban street. Yet sitting there alone, I realized something important. Lauren was finally beginning to notice my withdrawal. What she still did not understand was that my withdrawal had not started recently. It had started the moment I realized I was the only one still fighting for the version of our marriage that existed in my memories. And the more I thought about that realization, the more I understood that a much bigger change was quietly approaching. Some decisions happen in a single moment. Others happen so slowly that you do not realize they have already been made. A few days after my conversation with Lauren in the garage, I found myself sitting alone in a conference room long after everyone else had left. The project meeting had ended nearly an hour earlier, but I remained there staring at the city skyline through the glass wall. Denver glowed beneath the evening sky. Headlights moved along the highways like streams of light. The mountains stood dark in the distance. Normally, I would have been thinking about getting home, about dinner, about whatever plans Lauren and I might have for the evening. Instead, I felt no urgency at all. That realization stayed with me during the drive home. The closer I got to the house, the more I understood something that had been quietly growing inside me. I was no longer fighting to keep things the way they were. For years, I had convinced myself that perseverance was the answer. Work harder, be more patient, be more understanding. Eventually, things would improve. But relationships are not construction projects. One person cannot rebuild an entire structure while the other person watches from a distance. When I walked through the front door, Lauren was in the kitchen preparing dinner. The smell of garlic and roasted vegetables filled the room. She looked up when she heard me enter. "You are late," she said. "Long meeting." She nodded. A few seconds passed. Then she asked, "Everything okay?" The question caught me off guard. Not because it was unusual, because it used to be. Years earlier, she asked questions like that all the time. Then gradually she stopped. Now hearing it again felt almost unfamiliar. "Everything is fine," I replied. Lauren studied me for a moment before returning her attention to the stove. I could tell she wanted to say more. Instead, the conversation ended there. During dinner, the silence between us felt different than it once had. Not hostile, not uncomfortable, just honest. We no longer filled empty space with meaningless conversation. We simply sat across from each other, acknowledging that something important had changed. Later that night, while Lauren watched television downstairs, I sat in my home office reviewing old files. Financial statements, retirement plans, insurance documents. The practical pieces of a life built over nearly 2 decades. At first, I told myself I was simply getting organized. But deep down, I knew there was another reason. For the first time, I was evaluating my future independently of my marriage. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it felt strangely peaceful. Over the next several weeks, I developed new routines. I started going to the gym before work. I reconnected with friends I had not seen regularly in years. I spent weekends hiking trails along the foothills west of the city. The more time I invested in myself, the more energy I seemed to gain. It was as if I had been carrying an invisible weight for so long that I forgot what life felt like without it. Lauren noticed the changes almost immediately. One Saturday morning, she found me preparing for a hike. "You have been busy lately," she said. "I guess I have. You never used to leave the house this much on weekends." I smiled slightly. "There are a lot of things I never used to do." She looked at me carefully. "You seem different." That was becoming a common observation. Friends noticed it. Coworkers noticed it. Even I noticed it. The strange thing was that I had not become someone new. I had simply stopped neglecting myself. After Lauren walked away, I stood by the front door for several seconds thinking about her comment. Different. The word lingered in my mind throughout the day. What she interpreted as change was actually the return of something that had been missing for years. Ambition, curiosity, confidence. Parts of myself that slowly disappeared while I focused all my energy on maintaining a relationship that was drifting further away. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I received a phone call from a former colleague named David. We had worked together years earlier before he accepted an executive position with another company. After a brief conversation, he asked if I would be interested in discussing a leadership opportunity. Better compensation, greater responsibility, significant growth potential. Under normal circumstances, I might have politely declined. Stability had always been my priority. But as I sat there listening to him describe the role, I felt something I had not experienced in a very long time. Excitement. Real excitement. After the call ended, I leaned back in my chair and stared out the office window. Snow had begun falling across the city. Tiny white flakes drifted through the gray afternoon sky. Somewhere in that moment, I realized that life was quietly presenting me with a choice. I could continue waiting for my marriage to become what it used to be, or I could start building a future based on what existed now. And for the first time, the second option felt impossible to ignore. Excitement can be dangerous when you have spent years surviving on routine. The call from David stayed in my mind for days afterward. Not because of the salary, not because of the title, because it reminded me that possibilities still existed. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped thinking about what I wanted from life. My goals became practical. Pay the bills, maintain the house, support the family, be dependable. Those responsibilities mattered, but they had slowly replaced every personal ambition I once had. Now, for the first time in years, something unexpected had appeared on the horizon. A future that looked different from my present. A week later, I met David for lunch at a steakhouse near downtown Denver. Snow lined the sidewalks outside. The restaurant buzzed with quiet conversations and business meetings. David looked exactly the same as I remembered. Confident, focused, the kind of person who always seemed to know where he was going. After a few minutes of catching up, he got straight to the point. The company was expanding operations across several Western states. They needed someone with leadership experience, project management expertise, and a reputation for stability. Apparently, my name had come up more than once. "You would be a perfect fit," David said. I laughed softly. "You make it sound easy." "It is not easy," he replied. "That is why we are talking to you." The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. Growth plans, responsibilities, long-term opportunities. By the time we stood to leave, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Motivated. Driving back to the office, I found myself imagining possibilities. New challenges, new goals, new experiences. The strange thing was that none of those thoughts involved Lauren. Not because I was excluding her, because she had stopped being part of those conversations years ago. That realization lingered with me throughout the evening. When I arrived home, Lauren was sitting on the couch watching television. She glanced up as I entered. "You seem happy," she said. I set my keys on the table. "Do I?" "You do." I smiled slightly. "Maybe I had a good day." She studied me for a second. "You have been having a lot of good days lately." The comment sounded harmless, but I sensed something beneath it. Curiosity, maybe even concern. For years, Lauren had grown accustomed to a version of me that revolved around work and home. Predictable, consistent, available. Now she was watching that version slowly disappear. Over the next several weeks, I continued exploring the opportunity. Phone calls, meetings, strategic discussions. Nothing official yet, but the momentum was unmistakable. At the same time, I doubled down on the routines that had been helping me rebuild my sense of self. Early mornings at the gym, weekend hikes, time with friends, professional development courses. Small improvements accumulated faster than I expected. The more energy I invested in my own growth, the less energy I spent worrying about my marriage. That shift changed everything. One Friday evening, Lauren and I attended a neighborhood gathering hosted by friends a few blocks away. The house was full of laughter, conversation, and holiday decorations. At one point, I found myself speaking with several people about industry trends and future projects. The discussion became animated. Ideas flowed easily. I was genuinely enjoying myself. Later that night, while we drove home through quiet suburban streets, Lauren stared out the passenger window for several minutes before speaking. "Everyone seems to enjoy talking to you lately." The comment caught me off guard. "What does that mean?" I asked. She shrugged. "Nothing. Just something I noticed." But it was not nothing. I could hear it in her voice. For years, she had barely noticed my presence. Now she was noticing other people noticing it. We pulled into the driveway and sat in silence for a moment. The porch light cast a warm glow across the front yard. Finally, Lauren turned toward me. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." She hesitated. "Are you pulling away from me?" The question lingered in the darkness between us. Months earlier, I would have rushed to reassure her. I would have explained, defended, tried to ease her concerns. Instead, I looked through the windshield at the quiet house we had shared for nearly 2 decades. Then I answered honestly. I think I stopped chasing something that was already moving away. Lauren did not respond immediately. Her expression shifted in a way I had not seen before. For the first time, she looked genuinely unsettled. And as we walked into the house that night, I had the distinct feeling that she was finally beginning to understand what I had been feeling for years. The difference was that now, the distance she feared was no longer growing. It had already arrived. It is strange how quickly freedom can become uncomfortable for the person who demanded it. After our conversation in the driveway, something shifted in Lauren. Not dramatically, not overnight, but I began noticing small changes. She started paying attention to details she used to ignore. She asked where I was going when I left the house. She wanted to know how my meetings went. She occasionally lingered in rooms where I was working, as if trying to understand what occupied my attention now that it was no longer focused entirely on her. The irony was impossible to miss. For years I had been asking for connection while she slowly pulled away. Now that I had stopped reaching, she seemed confused by the distance. One Monday morning, I was reviewing emails before work when Lauren walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. She poured herself coffee and sat across from me. For a few moments, she simply watched me type. "You have been getting a lot of calls lately," she said. "A few. Work?" Mostly. She nodded slowly. The conversation might have ended there, but she surprised me. I feel like I do not know what is happening in your life anymore. I looked up from my laptop. Her expression seemed sincere. That was what made the moment difficult. Because a year earlier, I probably would have felt encouraged. A year earlier, I would have interpreted her curiosity as progress. Now it felt different. It felt late. Maybe that is how I felt for a long time, I said gently. Lauren lowered her eyes toward her coffee mug. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. That alone told me she understood more than she wanted to admit. The following week brought another round of conversations. With David and his leadership team, the opportunity continued moving forward. Every discussion made the future feel more real. Better compensation, greater responsibility, more influence. But what excited me most was not the position itself. It was what the position represented. Growth, possibility, a reminder that life was not over simply because one chapter had become disappointing. On Thursday evening, I met Ryan for dinner. We had been friends for nearly 20 years, and he was one of the few people who could read me without much explanation. Halfway through the meal, he leaned back and studied me. "You look different." I laughed. Lauren said the same thing. "Then she is finally paying attention." His response caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" Ryan shrugged. "You spent years revolving around your marriage, around your responsibilities, around everybody else's needs. Now you are building a life for yourself. People notice when someone stops shrinking." The word stayed with me long after dinner ended. People notice when someone stops shrinking. Driving home through the cool Colorado night, I realized that was exactly what had happened. Somewhere along the way, I had reduced myself to whatever role was required. Husband, provider, problem solver. I had become so focused on supporting everyone else that I forgot to continue becoming someone myself. When I arrived home, Lauren was sitting on the back patio beneath a blanket. The porch light illuminated the falling leaves scattered across the yard. She looked up when she heard the door open. "You were out with Ryan?" she asked. "Yeah." "How is he?" "Doing well." I expected the conversation to end there. Instead, she surprised me again. "Do you talk to him about us?" The question lingered between us. I considered giving a vague answer. Instead, I told the truth. "Sometimes." Lauren looked away toward the dark yard. "And what do you tell him?" I sat in the chair beside her. The air felt crisp. Winter was approaching. "I tell him that I spent a long time trying to save something by myself." She remained silent. "And now?" she asked quietly. I watched the wind move through the trees. "Now I am trying to save myself." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Lauren nodded almost imperceptibly. There was sadness in her expression. Not anger. Not resentment. Sadness. The kind that appears when someone begins recognizing consequences they never expected to face. As the evening grew colder, we eventually went back inside. Yet something about that conversation stayed with me. Because for the first time, Lauren seemed less concerned about winning an argument and more concerned about losing something she once assumed would always be there. What neither of us realized yet was that events already set in motion were moving much faster than either of us expected. And before long, a decision I had been quietly considering would force both of us to confront a future that looked nothing like the past. The decision arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon while snow drifted lazily past the windows of my office. I had just finished another conference call with David and two senior executives from the company. We spent nearly an hour discussing expansion plans, staffing strategies, and long-term goals. By the time the meeting ended, there was very little left to discuss. Everyone knew where things were headed. The position was mine if I wanted it. I sat alone at my desk staring at the city skyline beyond the glass. Cars crawled through traffic below. Clouds hung low over the mountains. For several minutes, I simply listened to the quiet hum of the building around me. Then I signed the preliminary agreement. The moment felt strangely ordinary. No dramatic music. No celebration. No rush of adrenaline. Just a signature on a document and the realization that my future had officially begun moving in a new direction. What surprised me most was not the excitement. It was the sense of peace. For years, every major decision in my life had been filtered through one question. How would this affect my marriage? This was the first time I had made a major decision by asking a different question. How would this affect me? That evening, I drove home through light snowfall. The neighborhood looked almost postcard perfect. Christmas lights decorated several houses. Fresh snow covered lawns and rooftops. The world seemed calm. predictable, stable. Yet I knew that beneath the surface, everything was changing. Lauren was already home when I arrived. She stood in the kitchen preparing dinner. The smell of tomato sauce and fresh bread filled the room. For a moment, I watched her quietly. There was a time when scenes like this filled me with comfort. Now they filled me with reflection. So much of our life still looked intact from the outside. The problem was that appearances can survive long after connection disappears. "How was your day?" Lauren asked. The question caught me off guard because she had been asking it more often recently. Months earlier, she rarely did. "Productive," I answered. She nodded. "Mine too." We ate dinner together and exchanged polite conversation. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic. Yet I kept noticing the way she studied me when she thought I was not looking. The curiosity was becoming impossible to miss. Later that night, I sat in my office reviewing documents related to the new role. Relocation options, travel schedules, leadership onboarding plans. There was a knock at the door. Lauren stepped inside. "Can we talk?" she asked. I set the papers aside. "Sure." She entered slowly and sat in the chair across from me. For a few seconds, she seemed unsure where to begin. Then she spoke. "I feel like I am losing you." The honesty in her voice surprised me. Not because it was manipulative, because it sounded genuine. I leaned back in my chair. "What makes you say that?" She looked down briefly before answering. "You do not need me the way you used to." There it was again. The same realization she had been circling for weeks. I thought carefully before responding. Maybe I spent too many years needing things from someone who stopped wanting to give them. Lauren flinched slightly. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. The truth often lands harder than anger. She stared at the floor for several moments. Then she asked a question I never expected to hear. "When did you stop fighting for us?" The answer came immediately, when I realized I was the only one fighting. Silence filled the room. Outside, snow tapped softly against the window. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator hummed. Ordinary sounds inside an ordinary house. Yet the conversation felt anything but ordinary. Lauren's eyes looked distant, thoughtful, as if she were replaying years of memories through an entirely different lens. "I never meant for things to get like this," she said quietly. I believed her. That was the tragedy. Most relationships do not collapse because one person wakes up and decides to destroy them. They collapse because people assume there will always be more time, more chances, more opportunities to fix what has been neglected. Eventually, those opportunities run out. Lauren stood and slowly walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. "Is there someone else?" she asked. I almost smiled. Not because the question offended me, because it revealed how much she still misunderstood. "No," I said calmly. "There is finally just me." After she left, I sat alone for a long time thinking about that exchange. For years, Lauren assumed my attention would always belong to her. Now she was struggling to understand that I had redirected that attention toward rebuilding my own life. What she did not know was that the official offer package would arrive within days. And once it did, keeping my plans private would no longer be possible. The offer package arrived 3 days later. A thick envelope sat on the kitchen counter when I returned home from work. The company logo was printed neatly in the upper corner. Relocation assistance, executive compensation details, leadership agreements. Everything I had spent months discussing was finally sitting in front of me in physical form. For a few seconds, I simply stared at it. Not because I was uncertain, because it represented something real. Possibility had become reality. I picked up the envelope and carried it into my office. Outside, fresh snow covered the neighborhood. The late afternoon sunlight reflected off rooftops and bare tree branches. The world looked bright and quiet. I spent the next hour reviewing documents, making notes, and preparing questions for the legal team. By the time I finished, I felt more confident than ever about my decision. The opportunity was not just a career move. It was proof that my future still belonged to me. Later that evening, I left the office doors slightly open while I went downstairs to make coffee. It was a simple mistake, one I did not think about at the time. When I returned a few minutes later, Lauren stood inside the room, holding several pages from the offer package. She looked stunned. The color had drained from her face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument we had ever had. Finally, she looked up. "What is this?" Her voice sounded almost fragile. I set my coffee mug down carefully. "It is an offer." She stared at the documents again. "Relocation?" I nodded. "Partially. Executive leadership position? Another nod. Lauren slowly lowered herself into the chair across from my desk. The papers trembled slightly in her hands. How long has this been happening? She asked. The question carried more emotion than anger. Several months. Her eyes widened. Several months. I remained calm. The discussion started a while ago. Lauren looked around the room as if searching for something familiar and failing to find it. You never told me. I thought about that statement for a moment. Then I answered honestly. There were a lot of things I tried telling you over the years. The words landed exactly as I expected. Not because they were cruel, because they were true. Lauren lowered her gaze. For several seconds, the only sound came from the heater quietly running somewhere in the house. Finally, she asked the question I knew was coming. Are you leaving? I leaned back in my chair. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted slowly through the evening air. I am accepting the position. That is not what I asked. I looked at her carefully. The sadness in her expression felt genuine. Yet I could not ignore how long it had taken to arrive. I do not know exactly what comes next, I said. But I know I cannot keep living the way I have been living. Lauren blinked rapidly and looked away. I thought you were just angry. I almost smiled. I was never angry. Then what were you? The answer came immediately. Tired. The room fell silent again. Lauren stared at the documents scattered across the desk. Her eyes lingered on dates, schedules, and signatures, evidence that an entire future had been developing beyond her awareness. I never thought you would actually move forward without me, she said quietly. That sentence revealed more than she probably intended. Not because it was selfish, because it was honest. She had assumed I would always remain where she left me, waiting, hoping, adjusting, enduring. Instead, I had started building something new. I spent years trying to move forward with you, I said softly. Eventually, I realized I needed to move forward somehow. Lauren closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, they looked different, less defensive, more reflective. For the first time since all of this began, she seemed to understand that this was not about one argument or one bad season. It was about years. Years of distance. Years of neglect. Years of assuming there would always be another chance. She carefully placed the documents back on the desk and stood up. At the doorway, she paused without turning around. I do not think I understood how serious. The weeks that followed felt unlike anything I expected. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, no grand declarations, just a series of quiet moments that revealed how much had changed. After discovering the offer package, Lauren became noticeably different. She started coming home earlier. She put her phone away during dinner. She asked questions about my day and actually listened to the answers. Some evenings we sat together in the living room and talked longer than we had in years. The strange part was that these were the exact things I had wanted for so long. Yet now they felt different. Not because I did not appreciate them, because I no longer depended on them. One Saturday morning I woke before sunrise and stepped outside with a cup of coffee. Fresh snow covered the neighborhood. The sky glowed pale blue as the first light appeared over the horizon. Everything felt still, peaceful. For years I had associated peace with fixing problems, solving conflicts, making sure everyone else was happy. Now peace felt simpler. It felt like finally being honest about reality. Later that morning, Lauren joined me on the patio. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and stood beside me without speaking. After several minutes, she finally broke the silence. I keep thinking about that phone call. I knew exactly which one she meant. Why? I asked. She stared across the yard. Because I thought you were trying to control me. Her voice sounded distant, reflective. And now? I asked. Lauren looked down. Now I think you were just trying to care. The words hung between us. Months earlier, hearing that might have felt like victory. Now it felt like understanding. There is a difference. Victory means someone loses. Understanding means someone finally sees the truth. We stood there quietly for a while. Then Lauren asked the question I think she had been avoiding ever since she found the documents. If I had realized sooner, would things be different? The answer deserved honesty. Maybe. She nodded slowly. There was sadness in her eyes, but there was also acceptance. For the first time, neither of us seemed interested in rewriting history. We were simply acknowledging it. As my transition date approached, the house filled with preparations, meetings, travel plans, paperwork. Yet something unexpected happened during that time. The resentment I had carried for years began disappearing. Not because Lauren suddenly changed everything. Not because the past stopped mattering. It disappeared because I stopped carrying it. Once I focused on building a future instead of reliving old disappointments, there was less room for bitterness. A few days before my official start date, Lauren and I sat together at the kitchen table. The same table where so many important conversations had taken place. The same table where I once sat alone wondering whether my marriage still mattered. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The room felt warm despite the winter weather outside. Lauren reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. The gesture was simple, familiar, yet it carried more sincerity than 1,000 promises. "I am sorry," she said quietly. Not for one argument. Not for one sentence. For years. I could hear it in her voice. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I nodded. I know. There was nothing else to say. Some apologies are too large for immediate answers. They simply become part of the truth both people carry forward. The morning I left for my first extended assignment, the sky over Colorado was clear and bright. The mountains stood against the horizon like they always had. Lauren stood on the front porch as I loaded my bags into the truck. Neither of us knew exactly what the future would look like. Maybe we would rebuild something stronger. Maybe we would discover that some distances cannot be undone. But for the first time in years, that uncertainty did not scare me. Before I climbed into the driver's seat, I looked back at the house, at the life we had built, at the lessons it had taught me. Then I looked at Lauren. She smiled softly, not the confident smile of someone taking things for granted, the humble smile of someone who finally understood their value. As I drove away beneath the morning sun, I realized the story had never been about winning an argument. It had never been about proving a point. It was about remembering that respect, appreciation, and effort are not guaranteed simply because someone stays. They must be protected, nurtured, chosen, every day. And sometimes the most important thing a person can do is stop chasing someone else long enough to find themselves again.